Welcome back. All right, so lots of stuff going on, and this is going to be a crazy next couple of weeks, right? So whiteboard will stay in place during this crazy couple of weeks here. So Columbus, some notes from last night's game against Pittsburgh. One of the two games they played against Pittsburgh, of course. Johnny Gaudreau, 3 assists last night, and playing on a line with Kent Johnson and Patrick Laine. And Johnson was one that we had speculated, is it going to be Johnson? Could be Jenner ends up in there. Sillinger could be a dark horse to end up playing with those two players, but if Kent Johnson's with them, he's got a good shot at the Calder. And of course, the Calder Trophy, best rookie of the year. Johnson likely to get a bunch of points if he's with Gaudreau and Laine. So we'll see what happens, if that line stays together. That's the beauty of the preseason and all of it. You can put lines together and see who works and who doesn't. Malgin is pushing his way into the conversation for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So he may be a forgotten player on some level, but he's been impressive so far through camp, preseason. And so he's in the conversation to make the team. And Toronto's fourth line will be interesting who does make it. Speaking of which, Adam Gadet is out with a shoulder injury, so that may open up a spot for Malgin, although he may have been pushing his way in ahead of Gadet anyways. And Muzzin is now skating on his own, meaning he's out by himself on an ice sheet, so he's not in a full practice, he's not taking contact. But his back discomfort that he's been dealing with clearly keeping him out, and either this is an abundance of caution thing or it's worse than what they're telling us. I'm thinking it's abundance of caution, but we'll see. Because when they say things like, well, it's back discomfort, it doesn't sound bad, right? But yeah, we'll see how long Muzzin's out and if he misses a significant amount of time in the preseason or if it extends into the regular season as well, right? But yeah, Toronto's got some decisions to make. Sean Couturier could return next month, so he could return in October if rehab resolves the back issues that he's been having. So they're really, fingers crossed, hoping that Couturier can come back from this as soon as possible and that it'll be rehab and not some kind of surgery or something more that needs to be done there. So, of course, myself being a big Sean Couturier fan, I'd like to see him come back sooner rather than later. John Tortorella working him pretty hard during practices. There's already been, some images going around of player or two getting kind of blown up in practice. Although the one player I saw laying flat on the ice apparently was an invite who was undrafted as well. So that's got to be tough, right? You haven't been drafted into the NHL and you get this invite and you're like, great. And then Tortorella skates you till you just pass out and then you got people taking pictures of you. Anyways, so yeah, we'll see how things go for the Flyers. They need Couturier back if they're going to improve this season. Strong debut for Huberdeau in the other game last night between Calgary and Vancouver. So the game in Calgary, where Calgary had their A lineup as Vancouver had their A lineup in Vancouver. And so Huberdeau, with a strong performance, that's good news. One thing is that I've talked, and I talked earlier today about veterans and how I don't worry about them being lazy. Veterans in new locations, I think, have a little more jump than veterans coming back to a team that they already know and they've already got experience with. So I think for Huberdeau, it was likely, it's my first game out there wearing a Flames jersey. I want to impress, so that's cool. Mangiapane in practice, but he's not game ready at this point. They've been kind of quiet on what exactly is going on with Mangiapane and how long he's expected to be out. I don't think it's going to be a major injury. I'm hoping not. But yeah, he is practicing, and that's good news having him on the ice. Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard shared a shutout last night. So Calvin Pickard, a goaltender who's bounced around a bit, was a number 3 option for the Detroit Red Wings, I think, over the last 2 years, right? So Pickard, honestly, he could end up being the number 3 for Edmonton. But Skinner, everything that's being said about Skinner is positive right now, and it sounds like he's got a really good attitude and he's ready to be the backup. Also, involving the Oilers, Niemelainen with a highlight reel goal, and he's turned some heads early on. And that, again, is the players that can stand out in these preseason games and just in general when it comes to camp and everything are the guys who are right on the edge and whether or not they're going to make it. So Niemelainen making an argument that he belongs on the team. Also worthy of note, Dylan Holloway got a goal too. But I think it's pretty much a given that Holloway should be able to make the team out of camp, right? Hurricane Ian is forecast to hit Florida and the East Coast later on this week. So it has caused the cancellation of Tampa Bay's home games on Wednesday against Carolina and Thursday against Nashville. So if you're keeping track, that means a hurricane canceled the game for the Hurricanes. So that's kind of weird. But yeah, so hopefully everybody's able to get out of the way. Of course, East Coast of Canada here, having dealt with Fiona over the last few days, and now the cleanup that's going on there. So all the best to them, and hopefully Hurricane Ian is very weak when it comes in and hits. Should it hit the mainland U.S. and apparently it's coming in on Florida. So all the best to everybody who's dealt with that and is dealing with that, and again for East Coast Canada as well. Matt Dumba. So it's Dumba trade speculation season. It feels like we're into year 3 of this, where he's the player that people expect to be traded off the Minnesota blue line. I think the fact that the salary cap has stayed flat has probably made it harder to trade him. But I find it interesting, too. He says it's not bothering him, the trade rumors. That I believe. I believe it because this is, and again, it feels like this is the 3rd season now where we've had those trade rumors out there. Do I think he ends up getting traded? Maybe. That being said, maybe their asking price is too high for other teams, and so we'll see what happens this season and where Minnesota ends up. If Minnesota ends up being a playoff team, I would think it makes it less likely he gets traded, even if they're in the playoffs, unless they can work out a hockey trade. Hockey trades are a thing that used to happen where Team A would look at Team B and say, hey, we could use a forward, you could use a defenseman, how do you guys want to swap these guys? And both teams would make a trade that was beneficial to each other and to themselves, and now trades are very often just about salary cap. It's got to be dollar in and dollar out, and well, there's the contract coming up here, and it all feels like trades now are completely different than they were many years ago. Hey, I'm old, I remember, but yeah, I don't doubt that Dumba's not bothered by trade rumors. Connor Geekie amongst the cuts. There've been cuts by numerous teams. Minnesota cutting players, Montreal cutting players. I didn't see anybody who was a surprise. Connor Geekie, I'm mildly surprised to see Arizona cut him already. They've sent him down to Winnipeg in the WHL, but obviously saw enough to say, hey, he needs to go back to juniors. There's a lot of work needs to be done here. He was a first-round pick this year, so Geekie is expected to be likely a top 6 or a top 9 player at some point in his career. Won't be yet. But remember, there are cases where a player will be called up as an emergency recall from juniors. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Geekie, but it can happen. So there's no guarantee he won't make his debut in the NHL this year, but it won't be out of camp as he's been returned to the WHL. Alarming news for Canuck fans. Here's how I see this. Brock Besser gets hurt every year. You might as well get it out of the way now. Hand surgery for Besser. He's out 3 to 4 weeks. Now, on the alarming side of this, it being hand surgery, that can be tricky. I've seen a lot of people talk about how Pettersson was terrible last year. Pettersson had major wrist issues and a major wrist injury, and I really think that for a large portion of the first half of the season last year, Pettersson was still dealing with that, and then I think it got better as the season went along, and so did his play. So hopefully with Besser, it being hand surgery, it's not something that's going to affect his shot. Besser is a player who could score 30, 35 goals a year, but he generally doesn't, and very often it's injuries that take him out of that conversation. Of course, there's been years where consistency's been an issue as well, but yeah, Besser out 3 to 4 weeks. Hopefully that's it, but this combined with the Mikheyev news means that if you're Nils Höglander, you have to like your chances of getting a really good shot at a top 6 role coming out of camp right now, because that is 2 forwards, and I would think Mikheyev, at the very least 3rd line, might have been pushing for 2nd line. With those 2 guys out, it does mean that for Höglander fans, he's got a better chance now of playing higher up the roster. Jim Rutherford has also said that the players who play the best in training camp will make the team. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. There are instances, of course, of teams cutting players who maybe worked better, maybe were actually better players, but they weren't under contract, or they didn't have to waive them to send them down, so it's no big deal. But we'll see what happens with the Canucks lineup. But losing Besser hurts. So Seattle, who are playing tonight against the Oilers, their lines in practice today, and apparently it's the same lines they had yesterday in practice, just noteworthy. Your top 6, Donato, Beniers, and Bjorkstrand on the top line. I like that top line. Ryan Donato's a player who should be scoring 20 goals a year. Doesn't. But again, I think he can, and I think he should. And if he's on a line with Beniers and Bjorkstrand, and if that ends up being an actual line that sees its way into the regular season, who knows? I think that Beniers has a good shot. I've seen him as one of the top 3 picks, most likely to win Calder, and so we'll see if that is in fact the case. But yeah, Beniers on that top line. Burakovsky, Wenberg, Donskoy on that second line. Burakovsky, of course, one of the additions in the offseason. Wenberg, one of the players they signed last offseason, and Donskoy, a guy who was the most jinxed around the net of everybody in the NHL last year. And so we'll see if Donskoy gets off to a good start. Put up some goals in the preseason. I know that those don't necessarily matter, but I think if Donskoy can get some goals going during the preseason, get some of that confidence back, then who knows? Maybe he'll be able to score. And I'm going to say 10 plus goals this year. I'm not going to get greedy and say 20, but 10 plus goals would be nice for Donskoy. And on the blue line, they've got Kempny paired with Schultz, so we'll see how that goes. Both newer players for Seattle. And, of course, this is a team that is looking to improve off of what was a pretty rough first year, but they're not the first team to have a rough first year, and we'll see how things go. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. I would not be surprised if there's more news of the day between now and the end of the day. And during training camp going through preseason, it's very often that there's a lot of news videos because there's a lot to report on. So I try to report on as much as I can from as many teams as I can. It ends up being a lot. And when it comes to players who get cut, I don't get into all of them, but I do like to get into the ones that are noteworthy, like, for instance, Connor Geekie. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for everything. I will talk to you again soon.